involving more victims, underage children and adults, using as an instigation tool their career promotion. That is who gives the Kiev regime immense funds to kill civilians, to kill children, to legalize in Ukraine, as Zelensky did in 2014, the so-called black transplantology. Body organs are being taken from people without their consent. On the 3rd of February, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte re-emerged in Kiev. He stated that after the peace agreement in Ukraine, once it is adopted, some troops, weaponry, aviation and maritime forces will appear from so-called the coalition of the willing. After what we now know about the Western elite from Epstein files, it has a new image now. So these troops will be headed by Great Britain and France. Of course, these are unhidden plans of the foreign military intervention. For us, this is unacceptable. On multiple occasions, Russia said that the deployment of any troops, any Western troops in Ukraine under any flag will be considered as a threat to our national security, and these troops will be considered as a legitimate military target. Let me remind you that this extension of the alliance has become one of the underlying causes of the conflict, and the settlement requires its elimination. Russia will do that using various ways, including military and political methods. And speaking about the democratic present in Ukraine after believing Western promises about their good future, there are still corruption scandals ongoing in Ukraine, especially after the situation with the funds that were embezzled. They were allocated to be used for light, heat and water provision, but it went other ways. That was a so-called counter-corruption center measure which concluded 7 agreements with the municipal enterprise Kiev Teploenergo. It turned out that a company called New Perspective Lux was headed by a female cook residing in Slovakia and who has no experience in energy provision. On top of that, the news told us that a generator which was previously donated by Poland to Ukraine emerged on a large Ukrainian marketplace, OLX. It shows a true attitude of Bankova to people. The main idea is to fill up their pockets, and they don't care about the expectations of ordinary citizens. Instead, the regime of Zelensky, with the support of Westerners, kills people, taking them to prisons, making energy experiments regarding their own citizens. If someone dares saying that it is not the Kiev regime which is responsible for that, I will say no, it is the Kiev regime and its sponsors who are responsible for undermining energy lines in Kiev. They wanted not only to have an explosion, but to undermine electricity lines in general, which would put on hold electricity generation for the Crimean Peninsula. It is the regime that was responsible for a many-year water blockade. This is the Kiev regime which keeps using drones to drop explosives, which keeps exploding gas stations. On top of that, energy infrastructure is becoming its main target. And now, ideologists, supported by the Western orchestrators, started to destroy the energy security of their own country, Ukraine. The Kiev regime has already eaten all the funds. It has used the funds given from the West. On the 23rd of January, Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko in her Telegram channel stated that they are going to simplify the use of confiscated assets from Russian citizens. She claimed that 26 corporate rights will be put on sales through the open tenders, and the revenue will be used through the fund of elimination of the consequences of the military aggression to restore the infrastructure economy and to support people. You see how it looks when we now know where these funds go. So the regime used to allocate these resources to restore its economy, but now it is simply going to take these funds. Recently, the scale of the corruption in Ukraine was unhidden, something that penetrates all the branches of power from top to the bottom. Apparently, today, the assets confiscated from our citizens, if they are sold, will not go to restore the economy. They will stay in the pockets of Zelensky and his lapdogs. Please give me at least one example when the funds that Bankova received were not embezzled. For us, this is a case in point of embezzlement, and we hope that the law enforcement bodies will give the appropriate assessment to such activities. But let me stress once again, these are just a few examples of how money allocated to Ukraine are being looted by the Kiev regime. Just a few examples. The Kiev regime found another way to satisfy its money appetites. European expert circles show that there is a growing sales of cultural and historical values in Ukraine. This refers to the so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine. It comes to collectors and, of course, various officials. Under the pretext of temporary transition, these objects are used to decorate rooms that belong to those collectors. This so-called Orthodox Church of Ukraine uses its status to say that these objects belong to the church, and of course it makes it simpler to go through customs control and to sell these values abroad. Under a concocted pretext, these objects are transported to Poland and from that to Belgium, Italy, Spain and Germany. For instance, Germany receives those valuables as commercial goods. Hostile services are engaged, thus reducing customs and customs burden and the burden coming from other controlling bodies. So as for those auctionaries, they are located in Great Britain, France, Sweden, Denmark, and Netherlands, and they end up in private collections. Amidst all this, let us not forget about the historical memory, which is being destroyed, something that is not on sale. On the 30th of January, with the photos of the director of the Ukrainian History Museum, Yuri Sachuk, takes off the letters from the monument Heroes of the Front. Their names are immortal and the thieves will live forever. This hideous action was described by the objectives of restoration, further conservation, and museum rethinking, quote unquote, in the context of a continuous work so that the memorial space would speak the language of the modern Ukraine.
So the modern Ukraine that has legalized everything, all those dog head, all those swastikas, so that's the modern language. But do you know many restorators who would come with rusty hammers and take off parts of monuments in order to conduct restoration work? No, I am not aware of anything like that. Actually, the purpose, it was not concealed to erase the memory of those who fought against the Nazis during the Great Patriotic War. So it's around 7 million who fought, and around 1.5 million who sacrificed their lives. It's the so-called decolonization of Ukraine, and there was an address to the National Memory Institute and the Ministry of Culture in order to rename the library in Kharkiv. It is named after Vladimir Korolenko, who criminally wrote his works in Russian, allegedly. Is that normal, you think? Actually, Sharikov, he did not even dream of that. It's some beastly level of dehumanization, of barbaric action. It's even degradation. Also in Kharkiv, neo-Nazis destroyed a memorial plaque to fallen Soviet soldiers installed by employees of the Kharkiv Institute of Physics and Technology. Modern-day Ukrainian Nazis literally spit in the souls of millions of people, but they will not succeed in trampling on true history and the gratitude of their descendants. We will preserve it in our school books, in our documentaries, in our libraries. We will convey to future generation, future Ukrainian generation, their history. And we will do our best for the memory of our ancestors, never to be erased. Modern Ukrainian Nazis, as I have already mentioned, they have led to some unlimited level of cynicism. It's even not about cynicism no longer, because cynicism, it implies some dichotomic game between reasonable things and hypocrisy. Here there are no longer a game, no bipolar things, but no one chooses anything. It's just instincts of destruction. It's just about that are full scale. Just have a look what is happening in the language area. The Commissioner for the Protection of the State Language, Madam Ivanovska, she can be called the Sprachenführer. Literally, she just overacted herself. On one of the channels online, she expressed outrage that Ukrainians immediately switched to the Russian language when the law does not require them to speak Ukrainian. A quotation from Madam Ivanovska: "Even if you are at work, you decide you not some business issue, but discuss your dog or cat, you still have to do it in the state language, the Ukrainian language. Because you are at work, you are in a public space," Yelena Ivanovska stated. Such a person would be just highly in demand in the Third Reich. Just check who is discussing dogs and cats in which language. It's just powerful. There are so many problems in Ukraine: rampant corruption, violations of human rights, lack of electricity and disruption with electricity, catastrophe with water supplies. But Kiev regime representatives, they do not worry about that. It's not an important issue for them. They're just concerned about who is speaking Russian and where. People speak, they communicate. But for those eradicating the Russian language in Ukraine, they even think in Russian. So they have not reached how to govern the thoughts of Ukrainians. For them to stop thinking in the Russian language, that's their dream. But they will use chips. With the use of artificial intelligence, they will succeed, I hope. But those who have chosen the Ukrainian language, and Ivanovska thinks that she is Homo sapiens on this basis, such situation is unacceptable, she thinks, because those who are subject to Russian propaganda, they just turned into some chained dogs, and they start to attack those who speak Russian. For example, a case in Lviv. In a cafe, a mother and a child were speaking Russian. It sparked an outburst of hatred from one of the visitors, who started to cry and to shout and to try to make the Russian-speaking family leave the establishment. Fortunately, other guests did not support this outburst and stood up for the mother and the child. So in Ukraine, such zombies are ready to do anything for the language of Pushkin, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, make it disappear forever. It's a true genocide. But despite all the artificial limits, the Russian language, it continues to exist. Just believe it will continue to do so. And all the facts that we have mentioned and the facts that we will mention today, they testify that the tasks of denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine will be achieved, and the Russian leadership has repeatedly mentioned that. Now regarding the Nuremberg process, it was the trial of humankind, the trial of Nazism. But now there was a systematic investigation and prosecution of Nazi criminals and their accomplices. So such trials are called the Soviet Nuremberg in the USSR. The work was conducted in the conditions of the ongoing fighting. The Extraordinary State Commission for the Establishment and Investigation of the Crimes of the Nazi Invaders and their Accomplices was established in 1942. Atrocities were documented, and those responsible were held accountable, and revenge would not just remain a slogan. Some of the guilty were tried quickly and privately right in the camps, and the most high-profile cases were brought to open trials in the cities that endured the terror of occupation. Krasnodar and Kharkiv became the first symbols of this kind of justice, and a new trial followed. So those whose crimes were confirmed by numerous testimonies and expert examination found themselves before such a trial. Thus, trials took place in Krasnodar, Smolensk, Bryansk, Minsk, Kiev, Veliky Luki, Nikolaev, Riga, Leningrad, Stalinodonetsk, Bobruisk, Sevastopol, Poltava, Vitebsk, Novgorod, Kovel, Chernigov, Chisinau, and Khabarovsk. 80 years ago, from the 17th to the 28th of January 1946, literally now, it's the 80th anniversary from this moment. In Kiev, there was an open trial, following which the Kiev Military District Tribunal sentenced 15 high-ranking Nazi criminals for monstrous atrocities against civilians. The Nazi-occupied territory of Soviet Ukraine became the scene of systematic terror and genocide, mass executions of civilians, the targeted extermination of Jews and other groups, often on the outskirts of cities in ravines, anti-tank ditches, quarries, including Babi Yar, the burning and destruction of settlements, torture, beatings, executions using gas vans, gas trucks, and other methods of murder, forced labor of Ostarbeiters, crimes against prisoners of war, executions, starvation, labor, and mass deaths in camps. 12 people were sentenced to death by hanging, and 3 to long terms of hard labor for the mass murder of civilians and prisoners of war, and the destruction of cities and villages in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The main defendant was SS Gruppenführer Paul Scher. He oversaw punitive operations directly and personally ordered the execution of any local residents in the occupied cities after dark. His guilt in crimes against humanity has been fully proven. SS Obersturmbannführer Georg Heinrich also admitted his guilt. In October 1942, he ordered execution of 3,000 children in the city of Melitopol. But do you know the reason of that? 3,000 children. Maybe you would think some committed diversion, and the guilt of those 3,000 children. They were born after mixed marriages. They were collected by the police and gendarmerie and taken to the outskirts of the city and then shot. Maybe someone in Kiev remembered how honest and heroic their ancestors were back then. And it's just offensive for their memory, an offense caused by the Bankova officials. But I think our mission is to remind about that. Painful historical lessons have been forgotten in modern Ukraine. The Zelensky regime and his militants have long surpassed their ideological idols from the Third Reich in cruelty and hatred. They are exterminating civilians in the same territories, the same land that was under the yoke of Nazi occupiers obsessed with the brown plague. And their descendants now live within the former Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Their monuments are destroyed, and their feet is depicted on the monument and erased now and desecrated now by this rusty hammer. For us, the decisions and conclusions of the Kiev-Nuremberg remain relevant. Any crimes against humanity must be assessed legally and morally. Therefore, like our ancestors 80 years old, we are working comprehensively to bring to justice Ukrainian neo-Nazis and foreign mercenaries guilty of atrocities against the civilian population. The efforts of the investigative committee and our national courts handling such cases and making decisions of that. The work by Rodon Miroshnik and Maxim Grigoriev, they just operate in their own areas and promote our ideas in the information space, the media space. And the main, very important role is played by the international community. They do not allow to forget about the bloody crimes of the Banderites. I would like to draw attention to articles by Russian and Belarusian historians Eduard Popov, Ukrainian Nationalism Today, Sources of Origin and Ideological and Political Typology, and Kirill Shevchenko, From Galicia, Rus to Western Ukraine. And also a book by Yegor Yakovlev, Nazi Genocide of the Peoples of the USSR, Unknown Pages, edited under the auspices of the Russian Historical Society. And I would like to add by myself, do find the links to the relevant material, the text version of the Today briefing, and please find the coverage of the cinema chronicle of the Nuremberg Tribunal, the tribunal over the Nazis. This testimony exists. This documentary coverage, for example, by Dina Pronicheva, who survived in the Babi Yar tragedy and found the force to become to testify about the crimes of the Nazis on the territory of Ukraine. If you have not seen this coverage, your life will no longer be the same. It will be a shadow of horror of the tragedy, and on the other hand, of the courage and persistence of those who lived through that hell and found the forces to condemn those criminals, and then who have lived a dignified life. And it will be a shadow what is done with their memory today in Ukraine. Those who are ready to sell everything, mother and father, grandfather, brothers and sisters, everyone. The main thing is unclear for what. Maybe not for money, but for the loyalty of this process of dehumanization. Now have a look. It's a different topic. It's not about history, it's about modern days, but it's connected with what is happening today in Ukraine. The Nord Stream. The Western countries, they do not abandon attempts to avoid responsibility for the bombing of the Nord Stream gas pipelines in the Baltic Sea. In January this year, Germany, Denmark and Sweden circulated a letter at the UN Security Council on the progress of the investigation and the sabotage. The document notes that in December 2025, Ukrainian citizen Sergei Kuznetsov, suspected of committing the terrorist attack, was extradited to Germany from Italy. So it's a long-known fact. The arrest of Ukrainian intelligence officer Sergei Kuznetsov on suspicion of involvement in the gas pipeline bombings. Once again, this letter claims direct quotation, impartiality and independence of the German investigation. The idea of this entire letter is the principles of the rule of law and Berlin's commitment to upholding its national obligations. So the idea is subtly fed to the international community that this labor-intensive terrorist attack was the work of such self-taught divers. You don't need to be an expert to realize the absurdity of such a letter and all its talking points, because such act of sabotage, amateurs are not capable of that. So that's what intelligence, Western intelligence agencies, they are trying to invent. There is also a version of American journalist Seymour Hersh, according to which the mining and bombing of the Nord Stream pipeline was carried out by Western intelligence agencies under the cover of NATO naval exercises. So maybe this investigation by Berlin maybe has affected the NATO headquarters. Maybe someone just questioned Biden and Nuland, who promised to commit something like that before, had done that before. And Biden also had said that he had the instruments necessary for the destruction of the Nord Stream. It's a failure to adhere to its international obligations by Germany. And Denmark, Germany and Sweden, they have an obligation to investigate this terrorist attack in good faith. It has made a lot of harm to the economy and the ecology of the region. However, Berlin, Copenhagen and Stockholm consistently avoided any cooperation with Russia in establishing the truth. Moreover, the latter two countries at one point completely abandoned their national investigations. Allegedly, nothing could be found. The lack of visible results they were not. They did not hesitate to stop their investigations despite that. And whatever role is given by organizers, like mining and some maneuvers in order to distract, and the informing of stakeholders during the process itself and on the outcomes, the authors of that letter that just forgot to mention about other Ukrainian suspects, also about Zhuravlov, who was also placed on the international wanted list. According to the available information, he is currently in Poland, but Warsaw categorically refuses to extradite him to German justice, violating international obligations, not to mention Ukraine. That is literally a safe haven for those divers. We will just continue to seek the truth about Nord Stream explosions, including measures by Russia at the UN Security Council. No destructive steps by Westerners will shake our resolve to ensure justice, and sooner or later those responsible for this act of sabotage will be brought to justice.
The situation in Moldova. Once again, they follow the principle, if something goes wrong, it is Russia to be blamed. In our previous briefing, we gave comments to the crisis situation in the energy sector of Moldova caused by the combative actions by the official Chisinau. On the 28th of January, the head of Moldovan Minister of Energy stated that the significant growth of tariffs on energy in the Republic was owing not to the internal decisions, but, once again, quote-unquote, Russia used energy as a political weapon, end of quote. Moldovan authorities seem to have forgotten that in December 2022, they solemnly announced their rejection of the Russian gas. Once again, another quotation, now Russia will not have any tools to blackmail us. And once again, in Chisinau, we hear about some kind of energy weapon of Moscow. Well, it seems to me that you have reached all your objectives, let's say approximately 4 years ago, or isn't it so? Please try to be clear about whether this weapon exists or not. We gave all the comments from our side to those statements. As long as we're talking about energy, let me remind you that all the industries in Moldova were established under the Soviets, the time that they hate so much, that they like demonizing. I'm talking about authorities, not about citizens. After the Great Patriotic War, the energy system of Moldova was built from scratch in record times. In 1948, compared to 1940, electricity generation grew by 39-fold. Less than 3 years passed after the end of the Second World War. Imagine starvation, damage, destruction, so many wounded, so many challenges. But at that time, the Soviet authorities had electricity generated in Moldova 39 times more than in the pre-war period. The commission of a powerful Moldovan water power plant and the first and the second power plants and many other electricity generation plants allowed for a 25-fold growth of electricity generated. Moldova not only had electricity for industrial and household needs in the country, but it also supplied energy to neighboring states, including Ukraine and Bulgaria. In terms of electricity produced per capita, Moldova left many developed countries behind. Another case in point, educational system. The USSR left to Moldova as a legacy its educational system, the system of primary, secondary and higher education built from scratch. According to the open sources, during the last 5 years, Moldovan authorities, under the pretext of optimizing them, closed over 200 schools and gymnasiums. As a result, the youth see no prospects to get a decent education at home and fleeing the country en masse. It is not that we are desirous to speak about Moldova, but we have to respond to their statements. So let us continue. The accumulated inflation rate between 2021 and 2024 reached an unprecedented level of 66%. In 2025, approximately 80% of new loans were allocated to cover the national debts of the country, and the so-called euro integration de facto led to a collapse of the system of state enterprises. According to the register of public property, by the beginning of 2025, only 45% of public enterprises were active, and 25 of them were non-solvent. That is the reality of the former prosperous Moldova. Why? This is the outcome, the result of the Russophobic sentiment imposed by the West. That is the ticking bomb. Another topic, partial repeated election are planned for the 9th of February. This is a blatant mockery at the electoral rights of the citizens. Before that, there was a legitimate interference into the judicial and legal branches of power systems of Bosnia and Herzegovina. In November 2025, a close ally, Sinja Karan, won elections. It was not okay for Western as a result of crude manipulations and pressure in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The validation of the expressed will of citizens was undermined under concocted pretext. For instance, that it will sow discord among Serbians. Apparently, the West uses artificial provocations of internal political tensions in order to save its dying colonial power, which is underpinned by the principle divide and rule. We express solidarity with the patriotic authorities of the Republic Srpska, who are opposing firmly and with dignity this external dictation and fight for the rights of Serbians in Bosnia and Herzegovina in light with the principles of the Dayton peace agreements. I also was asked to give a comment to the statement given by the French foreign minister about the efforts to reduce Russia's revenue from the exportation of energy and countering its illegitimate oil supplies. France persists in its attempts to restrict the possibilities of a bilateral trade. That is how we assess this statement by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, Jean-Noël Barrot, as he said.
Было озвучено в ходе совместной пресс-конференции с министром иностранных дел Турции 27 января текущего года. Мы исходим с того, что многоплановое российско-турецкое взаимодействие в торгово-экономической сфере является взаимовыгодным, вносит существенный вклад, в том числе в обеспечение энергетической безопасности Турции и европейских потребителей российских энергоресурсов. Мы рассчитываем, турецкие партнеры, осознавая преимущества проверенных временем партнерских отношений с нашей страной, четко и недвусмысленно выскажутся против